When I started working with Unreal, I realized, oh wow, all the stuff that you need to make a game is already here. It was a big shortcut. And for a team that was as small as ours, there's a handful of people, that was really the only path.
I kind of came out of the community of modding on 2003 and UT99, so that's really where that whole team was built.
He and I were really into like snowboarding games and skiing games and stuff where you do flips and things like that, so we want to do it with cars, of course. It makes sense.
Everything was on fire. Nobody was sleeping for a week. But at the same time, it was super exciting because so many people were playing the game.
The reason we went PlayStation Plus was a budget issue. So we didn't have any money to spend. Our budget for marketing and PR was practically nothing.
We just knew from years of working on these big games like Gears and like XCOM and all that, we knew how to take it that last 10% of polish that we didn't know how to before.
Yes! Video games! They allow us to do things we could only otherwise dream of, like hunt bandits on the Wild West, or score the winning touchdown in the Super Bowl, or raid dead people's tombs. But to be completely honest, I don't think many of us actually go to sleep at night and dream about doing this. I mean, don't get me wrong, this is pretty awesome actually, but us gamers are a picky bunch, and with so many experiences out there for us to choose from, it's hard for strange new ideas to grab our attention. But what if you stumbled across this idea? What if you thought it would make an amazing game? How long would you work on it to try and convince the rest of the world? Today on Noclip's look into the story of Rocket League, we explain how an Unreal Tournament 2004 mode evolved into a global sporting video game sensation, and how it took almost a decade for any of us to notice.
I think I was like 6 years old. My dad brought home a TI 99 4A and a book about how to type in computer programs, and I started typing them in and playing, they would always have games in the back, so that's what I wanted to type in. Then I started learning how you could change things. There was a little sprite of a guy who was like dancing back and forth, and I'm printing the code and looking at it, and I could see the array of zeros and ones that would make up his pixels. So I remember that like sort of aha moment when I'm like, oh, I could just change this and I could turn him into a dog or another kind of character. It was awesome. Long story short, I dropped out of college, started an internet company doing web hosting. And I did pretty well because, everything was booming at the time. But my real passion was in games, and I used the sort of success of that company to start hiring people and building a game studio based on, modding existing games.
Double kill. Rampage. Monster kill.
When I started working with Unreal, I realized, oh wow, all the stuff that you need to make a game is already here. It was a big shortcut. And for a team that was as small as ours, there's a handful of people, that was really the only path. I knew that Epic was interested in having vehicles in their game. I was really a big fan of Halo at the time. I thought mixing vehicles with a first-person shooter was the greatest thing ever. I'm like, why couldn't I do this to UT? It's a smaller chunk of something, as opposed to us trying to make a whole new game. So we basically made a game mode. It was codenamed Vehicle Mod. We basically did the same vehicles that Halo had, the original 5 vehicles. Showed it to them like the next GDC, and they were blown away. They were like, oh my God, this is great. We want you to come and work on this with us. I basically worked out of Epic, which was great because I got that inside scoop on what Epic was doing and learned all about how the real game companies do it.
Red power node and blue power nodes under construction.
of engagement had changed. Headshot! Vehicular warfare. Aerial combat. Unreal Tournament 2004.
I mean, I kind of came out of the community of modding on 2003 and UT 99. And they kind of just brought in a bunch of community members because they were adding both Onslaught and Assault. I just happened to get put on Onslaught and, worked closely with Dave ever since. It was overwhelming at first, getting there the first week and causing some big bugs and having, Cliffy B come and kind of give you a stern talking to, kind of really kicks you in the ass, so.
It ballooned into a much larger team as I got there. A lot of people from Epic, a lot of people from the community that they'd hired to come in and work on it. And it was an amazing time because we were kind of siloed off from the rest of Epic in a lot of ways. We were in one great big room. We called it the UT 2004 War Room. There wasn't a huge amount of deadline pressure. We were all just coming up with the coolest things we could and throwing them into the game as fast as we could.
So I guess how did you come up with the mode of Onslaught? Because vehicles in a game, you can kind of go in any direction.
I was inspired by PlanetSide, actually. I knew I wanted vehicles in the game, but I wanted a more interesting game type. And I liked this idea of territory control. They had this cool idea that you couldn't take over a territory until you'd taken over the previous territory. So you had this kind of moving battlefront, and that's where I came up with the node system. So you'd have to capture one node and destroy its power core before you could possibly attack the next one.
What was the name of the car with the blades out the side?
Oh, the Scorpion, yes. I don't remember whose idea it was to make those blades, but that was pretty awesome. Just ching, and then you just mow people down. My favorite was the Manta, because you could crush people. You could fly over them, and then we put this force in that would just smash down. That's one of the things I think I really enjoyed about UT was there really weren't any rules. You could do almost anything.
Frostbite for Onslaught was the first map that I actually made. I was putting jumps and things all over the place. I love to ski, and that was a snowy map, so I'm I just want to put little ski jumps everywhere, little kickers. Dave was obsessed with SSX Tricky. I played a lot more of the amped snowboarding. Tony Hawk 1 and 2, I love those so much, just the expression of doing whatever you want.
He and I were really into snowboarding games and skiing games and stuff where you do flips and things like that. So we want to do it with cars, of course, makes sense. And one of the things that we did in that mode was we were coming up with cool mutators. And one of the mutators was a map called ONS Tricky. It was just a big obstacle course. It looked like a monster truck rallies with a stadium and just dirt ramps and stuff like that. So we did the typical snowboarding thing where you press a button and the car sort of leans down in a way, and then you let go, and the longer you held it, the higher it flies up in the air. And then we made this complicated system for the mouse and keyboard so that you could flip and you could roll and you could try to get trick points or whatever. And we thought that was fun. It wasn't super popular in the game, but we had a lot of fun with it. Onslaught was really a proving ground for me. It was really my big break and my big sort of oh, I proved that I can do this and make something really popular.
Dave and his team had learned a lot at Epic. They'd shipped the defining mode of Unreal Tournament 2004, and they developed their skills in things like vehicles, physics, and networking. Plus, they were some of the only people in the world who knew how to use Unreal's new engine. So he had an idea to spin off his team and create a new studio that would help other studios create games in Unreal Engine while using the profits from those contracts to develop original work.
I couldn't hire people in the industry because they were who's Psyonix? Right. I said, no, I made Onslaught. They're oh, well, that's pretty awesome, but I'm going to go work for a really cool company. So I hired interns.
I started in October 2006, about 10 years ago. I was brought in with a round of interns.
2007, right after I graduated college, so about 10 years ago. It's really 10 years ago because I was interned in 2006, but full-time 2007.
Ran sort of a competitive internship and said, look, I know everything about Unreal Engine 3, it's coming out, it's gonna be big, big friends with Epic Games, they're giving me contract work, we're gonna get, new licensees are gonna come in because Epic doesn't like outsource expertise, and we do, and we're the only ones who know this. I kind of made two rules. I said, well, we're always going to keep the company stable. You know, we always need to have work coming in. It's kind of our base, but we always have to have somebody working on original content. You go one way or the other, and it can be pretty dangerous. If you go total, like, we want everybody constantly burning the candle and making money come in, you're never going to be able to make your dream game. And if you just focus on your dream game, well, you know, I'd seen so many other studios try this, and you make your dream game, but you usually need 2 or 3 shots at that. And you blow all your money, and then you're out of business. So I'm like, let's do a hybrid. You know, we'll always stay stable, but we always have somebody working on it. And I'd seen other studios try this as well, and it was too tempting, and they pulled their people off of it, and you can't do that. You have to keep people on that. And the game that we kept it on was this trick game that you know, this trick mechanics with the vehicles that we kind of pulled from our work at Epic. We didn't know what the game was. We just knew it involved cars that can jump and trick around.
We started experimenting with lots of tracks and things, you know, obstacle courses, kind of get through this level as quickly as possible, like collect these pickups or something, you know.
Cars that can shoot, so we tried like a battle game, we tried
Capture the flag, cops and robbers mode.
We tried an obstacle course that was really difficult to get through, and there was one point it had a grappling hook. I mean, like some crazy stuff. We ended up with kind of that zany mode that we called Crash Course for a while, and then we used the name Supersonic Acrobatic Rocket Powered Battle Cars because the game was so crazy.
The tricky part was the maps we had them playing on were almost like Swiss cheese.
Okay.
And so just trying to keep them on the map, like navigate the map and then also predict, because you had to hit other players off the map. So trying to get them to just predict where other players are going while also not driving off the map themselves, that was pretty challenging.
It sounds like some sort of like car-based American Gladiators or something.
Just about, yeah.
But at the same time, we were still working on all of the contract work and, you know, working a lot for Epic. We worked on Gears of War, we worked on UT3, spattering of other titles, yeah, lots of really cool stuff.
The cars felt great, they leapt and spun like skiers. The physics were great too, they were predictable yet felt realistic. The game was just missing one crucial element.
One of the guys, it was Adam Beckwith actually, the brother of Ben Beckwith who came with me from Epic. He suggested that we throw a ball in there.
My brother Adam and I kind of championed that at first because we loved Deathball. We just loved the physics, sport, but individual player aspect of the sports.
So we're like, oh, we could try it. It would be a cool side mode. And then I don't think for the next 2 weeks we got any work done because we were just playing this game. And we were in the middle of Xbox Greenlight, actually. And they had just greenlighted the game after much negotiation. And we're like, we want to change everything. And you know, PlayStation at the time was actually being really open with their platform, kind of like you don't even, like you had to have a publisher to go on Xbox. So we had that whole mountain to climb, and the publishers were looking at our game like, what? I don't get it at all. And we weren't making it any better by saying, okay, now it's soccer with cars. So we're like, well, PlayStation, we don't have to answer really to anybody. We can just make our own thing and throw it on there. So that's how Supersonic Acrobatic Rocket Powered Battle Cars came to be.
Were you in the titling, the naming meetings?
I was. I don't remember our collective insanity.
I think part of me, it was inspired by a Conan O'Brien bit where he was talking about
embryonic, rockabilly, polka-dotted fighter
pilots. I thought it was hilarious. So it's actually my fault. I said, what about Supersonic Acrobatic Rocket Powered Battle Cars? We didn't really think about the fact that, you know, people wouldn't be able to tell their friends about the game. They're like, I like this game. It's called Soup something, Battle something, and you'll never find it. It's buried in the PSN store, but it's somewhere in there. Journalists didn't really like it either because they had to type it so much. Like, so yeah, we took some heat on that.
Psyonix had worked themselves to the bone to finish battle cars, and in doing so had spread themselves rather thin. They didn't really have the capital to market the game all that well. Now, they had added a rather forward-thinking feature that allowed players to upload clips of the game directly to YouTube. Perhaps that would help spread news of the game. Perhaps it would have. If the game wasn't called Supersonic Acrobatic Rocket Powered Battle Cars, it's not exactly SEO gold now, is it?
A lot of things that sabotaged the first game we felt like were just sort of technical inefficiencies that we could improve on. We had always played the game on PCs. So we'd always played this game with no input latency at 60 frames per second on a LAN connection, which was dramatically different than what you got going on PlayStation 3, playing on licensed servers over the internet. Like, they're actually very different games.
It did eventually make a profit, only because we spent so little on it in the first place, but it took like 2 years for it to actually make all of its money back. And that doesn't pay payroll. So we had to immediately go back. And in fact, it was a little bit of an emergency mode because I started to break a little bit of my rule. It's very hard to ship games. When it really comes down to like, we got to get this out the door, it's almost impossible not to be all hands on deck. We pushed the company to the brink, really, at that time.
I think when you're a little more of a veteran, it hits you a little harder when something you make not fails, but isn't a huge success. And at the time, it was like our second thing we'd done, so it kind of felt like, well, of course, we'll just move on to other projects. We had the same feeling going into Rocket League, where it's like, this could be a big thing if people just get into it. And with the first game, they just didn't so much, except for our super hardcore fans.
We had to take some projects pretty quickly afterwards that maybe were not the most ideal terms, and were really rough on us. Like, we had to push a lot harder than we normally did. We did a few updates for Battle Cars, but I decided to really strongly focus on studio building at that point. I'm like, we need a bigger studio, we need more expertise in what we're doing. We're gonna come back to this game. And we always knew that. We always knew we were coming back to it at some point. We were really good at multiplayer, and we were really good at vehicles. So a lot of our work ended up being around that. And as we grew, we got a stronger and stronger reputation on the multiplayer side of things. So everybody who was doing a UE3 game that had a multiplayer side, that's why Mass Effect 3 came to us, actually, is a good example. The Mass Effect 3 was mostly just consulting, a little bit of work, and then others like Bulletstorm are like, make our multiplayer mode. And then when Nosgoth came along, that was a really big change for the studio. It was a publisher saying, hey, we want you to make this game. That was a big deal for the studio because it allowed us to expand a lot and build our art team in particular, and kind of become a really full-featured studio. And that was at the same time we decided to reboot Battle Cars into what became Rocket League.
It was sort of hard to talk ourselves into spending a bunch more money making the same thing again. But it was always kind of like, well, our fans probably deserve an updated sequel at some point.
There was a very strong community around it. We were talking to these guys and we knew them super well. You know, guys like, Kernovi, who was playing under his dad's name at the time, Steve Bills, Gibbs, all those guys were there from the beginning, and we knew all of them. And we just wanted to do right by ourselves, we wanted to do right by them.
You want to give contract work your all, especially just to keep the company going, but you always have these outlets for like, this is how we would do it if we were in charge. The first game was all the same pieces. Like, I think if you go back and play it now, you'll see all the same things, it just doesn't feel as good. And we just knew from years of working on these big games like Gears and like XCOM and all that, we knew how to make something really good all of a sudden. We knew how to take it that last 10% of polish that we didn't know how to before. And we just felt like that would push it over the edge, maybe.
Psyonix had evolved from a scrappy Unreal Engine coding house to a confident studio capable of self-publishing their own games, but they still hadn't had their hit. What happened next would not only change the future of the studio forever, but it would change the way we think about sports games forever too. In part 2, I talked to Psyonix about battle cars, melting servers, and the terrifying feeling of giving your game away for free. See you then.
Alright, go. You son of a bitch! Yeah, totally. right, go. Awesome. Yeah, I am. Oh god! I don't trust this car. I'm fucking good. Let's do this shit. Yep.
Let's try that again. To get any more of the plants.
This is the most important thing I've ever worked on.
This is the trade after doing all the stand-ups. Not the jib, the fucking
Gimbal, yeah.
Alright, here we go, right?
Yep. Oh, that was so rad.
Did you keep it locked?
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah,
So
let's do one
probably
more
looked
and
like
I'll
it-
follow it.
It probably looked like it nailed it.
Yeah, it did. That's why I was like so glad that I locked down because it fucking botched as soon as it landed.